Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 13th chapter of the book of Proverbs. The first half, it's a chapter of 25 verses. We've divided the first 12 to be covered in this lesson, and we're going to save the next because beginning in the 10th chapter, that's a significant narrative transition in the book of Proverbs, whereas the 9 chapters which come before us have more of the characters and qualities of a narrative. That which comes after it, the Proverbs in the order in which they are arranged, more often than not have no conceptual resemblance to the one which comes after or the one who comes before. But as we'll soon read when we do the next lesson to finish this chapter, it makes more sense to arrange them that way. And one of the things I've been doing in review of the material before I'm going to cover in the actual lesson itself was just reviewing the words which were most prolific, so I did one on righteousness. I reread every verse and commented briefly on the ones which speak of righteousness, and then wickedness was my most recent one. But the thing I want to do is not emphasize a word, but a theme which is communicated throughout the 12th chapter which precedes it. There are 10 verses which refer to the art of conversation. We're going to try and sum them up as briefly as possible. But before we... So the first of which is, the thoughts of the righteous are justice, the counsels of the wicked are deceit. So Solomon, as a king, a royal ruler, he would have been surrounded by advisors, many of whom were wicked and deceitful. So that advice, the distribution of advice and instruction, is one means of a conversation in the use of words. Next verse. The words of the wicked are, lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the straight delivers them. So the words of the wicked and the words that spring from their mouth are inviting trouble. They are living by the sword and dying by it as a consequence. They invite blood and destruction in others, and they eventually inevitably die by the sword because they lived by it. But the mouth of the straight will deliver them from predicaments. It'll be a problem solver, more useful than any weapon. So words are a weapon, but they are also a tool. They can bring harm, devastation, or they can bring uplifting and healing and et al., etc. Verse 13, and the transgression of the lips is an evil snare, but the righteous gets out of distress. So a transgression of the lips can be likened to a lie, which is an evil snare. It creates a web of further lies that one must conceive in order to protect the lie, and eventually they get so caught up, or, usually they get so caught up in the lie that the lie eventually, all it takes is one of them and the chink is exposed. But the righteous, we are geared to... we don't invite trouble to our life, so we're going to have a better chance of emerging from distress with our character intact than the lips of evil men who seek and invite their own trouble. Next verse. From the fruit of his mouth one is filled with good, and the works of a man's hand is given back to him. So this is the one of the two only verses which are arranged in an antithetical juxtaposition. That's the common format in Proverbs. So we just to pick its predecessor, the evil and the righteous are contrasted. But here this is the completion or fulfillment of a sentence. It is not a contrast. And every verse we're going to be covering in the first 12 verses of the chapter today are arranged antithetically, just a heads up. Next verse, 15. The way of the fool is right in his own eyes, but he who listens to advice is wise. So the fool, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to receive instruction. They don't want to receive guidance. They don't want to receive advice. But the wise will go out of their way to listen to advice and learn. Listening cannot come without learning. Learning cannot occur without listening. He who speaks truth declares righteousness, but a false witness deceit. So these are self-evident statements. A truth is righteous because righteousness is embodied by the one who is the divine embodiment of all truth. And false witness is quite clearly a deception and a manipulation and a dishonest ploy with ulterior motives. Rash speaking is like piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise is healings. So this goes to the potentiality of words to be tools and instruments or weapons. So they have a sword-like quality, which is likened to rash speaking. That means speaking without thinking saying what you're saying before thinking about what you're saying, just being rash and careless. And rashness is the extreme of which courage is the means between rashness and cowardice. So it is too much. It's a careless type of courage. But the tongue of the wise heals, restores, and mends relationships that other conversations have ruined. The lips of the truth is established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. So truth is connected to the lips of the truth that springs from the lips are eternal. That means it is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It is true now, it is true then, and it will be true tomorrow until the end of time. So that the lips and the ones who speak the truth are sealed in its eternality for having lived a life speaking and dwelling and contemplating on truth and living truth. But the lies are fleeting as the words. They're mist and vapors. They come out like that, and then they disappear. Nothing comes of them. So they have a temporary and short life. Lying lips are an abomination to Yahweh, but those who deal truly are his delight. So abomination is perhaps the most severe word one can use to describe a term of derision and revulsion towards something. So lying lips, with every right does Yahweh reserve to consider them an abomination. Lies are one of the commandments in the Decalogue. We have to speak truth and live truth and deal truthfully in our interactions with others. And if we do that, we will be a delight and a source of pleasure and acceptable to him. And then just one final verse, 23. A clever man is concealing knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims folly. So foolishness by its very nature is self-advertising, it's self-aggrandizing, and makes itself known to everyone in the room, but little does the fool know, who is so intent on expressing the foolish musings of his own heart, that he is making himself a fool, whereas a clever man will conceal knowledge. That is from such a one, that is likened to casting our pearls before swine. We should, we don't have to make everyone in the room know what we know, because most of them aren't just going to appreciate it. All right, opening verse of the 13th chapter. A son is wise through his father's discipline, but a scoffer shall not listen to rebuke. So the antithesis is between the wise and the scoffer. A wise son will embrace the educative value and live with and learn from discipline, and perhaps acquire the traits of self-discipline from being externally disciplined, because they will have the behavioral patterns and modes oriented to avoid the painful aspect of discipline. But the scoffer just makes his ignorance known. Scoffer is ultimately translated as a mocker, and the book of Proverbs has a lot to say about characteristics and the characters who embody these characteristics. So it has a lot to say about scoffers, it has a lot to say about fools, it has a lot to say about mockers, it has a lot to say about simple people, it has a lot to say about wise people, it has a lot to say about righteous people, it has a lot to say about wicked people, evil, et al., etc. So it does cover the cast of characters, the full range of human types, characteristic types. And the scoffer will not want to hear rebuke, so they will go out of their way to avoid it, because they're content to live their life the way they're living. And a scoffer is by definition one who treats trivially that which ought to be taken seriously. They say, there's no God we have to answer to. That's incidentally the echo of the fool, as described in Psalms 14:1 and 53:1. That is their motto and mantra and maxim. From the fruit of the mouth a man eats the good, but the will of the treacherous is for violence. So the contrast here is the good, or good and treacherous. So from the fruit of a mouth a man may eat the good. That means the food is going to be a goodness and a source of goodness beyond itself. It's going to nourish him and sustain him. If he works for what he has, if he earned what he has, then he has every right to eat it. He who toils by the sweat of his own labor is more than entitled to the fruits of that labor. But desire of treachery is, there's just no need for violence in normal people's lives. The the ordinary person is repelled by violence and will go out of their way to diffuse potentially provocative situations, but the treacherous will have violence on their minds, in their hands. It is the way of the treacherous. It is synonymous to and connected to and interchangeable with violence. He who watches over his mouth guards his soul, but he who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. So here we have our version of the linguistics of which we commented on in advance of this lesson, the actual passage itself. So, watching and disciplining one's own mouth, this is likened to taming a hitherto untamable beast. The mouth has a fire of iniquity, and it spreads, according to James, and it is likened to the same author as a wild beast, an untamable one. So it is a mark of wisdom to have disciplined and controlled and exact and accurate speech patterns. And that can also, if you watch over your mouth, if you don't say everything that comes to your mind, you're going to say something stupid that can get you killed. But if you just are in the habit of not saying every sick and evil thought that crosses across your head, that's going to be an avenue for your personal redemption from specific situations. But if you make your heart known, if you are the fool who proclaimeth foolishness, as we read in the 23rd verse of the most recent chapter, then you're inviting your own ruin by the words you speak, which, not everything you have to say should be made known and heard to all. The soul of the lazy one craves, but has not, while the soul of the hard workers are enriched. So the contrast is between the lazy ones and the diligent, and these are two of the character traits that I neglected to list. That wasn't an exhaustive list or anything. It was just what was on my mind at that moment in time. But he doesn't have any kind word to say about lazy ones, and they have appetites, but they don't have the motive or the drive or motivation to work to satisfy their appetites. They want but don't want to work. While the soul of the hard worker, one who is diligent in toiling the soil and receiving the fruit and reaping the harvest that they have sown, will be enriched as a result of their labors. Now, the lazy man can come up with 1,000,001 excuses to not do what needs to be done and to quote a proverb, which is a literary device not unique to the Hebrews, a proverb of the American Benjamin Franklin: "He who is good at making excuses is seldom good for anything else or for anything else." Your pick. A righteous one hates a lying word, but a wicked man is loathsome and comes to shame. So the righteous have an aversion to lies and deceit and dishonesty. We will recognize it and reject it for what it was. We will hate the lying word, but not the one from whom the lying word springs. We will seek to address and correct and mend and intervene lovingly in that person's life when the time is when the occasion is appropriate and the intervention is necessary. But a wicked man, they invite their own shame because they are loathsome, and they don't think they're inviting their own shame. They think they're taking a shortcut to something greater, but little do they know that their characteristics are going to be exposed, and they're going to be ashamed and embarrassed from that exposure. Righteousness watches over him who is perfect in the way, but wickedness overthrows the sinner. So righteous has a protective and guiding, and it serves as a compass, and it just protects us as we walk through the way, which is straight and narrow. To add the New Testament, the way here is a reference, the covenant way that Solomon's referring to, but so that's the covenant path, and one who is walks it with uprightness and integrity and honesty and decency will have their righteousness guarding them and protecting them and shielding them. But the very wickedness that sinful people dwell in and abide in and abound in will it has a self-destructive effect. So the cause and effect of living in wickedness is that you invite the ultimate wickedness on yourself, which is death and hell and eternity. But wickedness, okay. There is one who makes himself rich, yet has none at all, and one who makes himself poor, yet has great riches. So what's better expressed in other translations is this is the illusion of appearance. And so there is one who looks rich and dresses rich and acts rich, but it's all a sham, it's all a ruse. He is just acting above and beyond himself. He spends all of his money on, the car that takes him to places, or the clothes, but he lives in his car for all we know. And one who makes himself poor that yet has great riches. This is a cast of characters I'm more intimately familiar with, having gone to college. One inevitably encounters the guilt-stricken liberal, privileged liberal, just ashamed of the fact that they were born privileged, and they atone for their guilt by embracing and dressing and acting like their socioeconomic inferiors, and they're ashamed of their wealth, so they don't like to advertise the fact that they are privileged through their dress. But the only reason they're indifferent to materialism is because they can afford to be so. So alike, they're both a sham and illusion. They're both equally worthless and equally sinful and equally deceptive people who act, who, one, try and define themselves by the class they identify with or would like to belong to, rather than the characteristics they have to offer. The ransom of a man's life is his riches, but the poor does not hear rebuke. So actually owning and possessing wealth invites more challenges and often more troubles than one would have in the absence of that wealth. They are vulnerable to, violence and being captured and, extracted and extorted for a ransom. But the poor will not be similarly fated. They will not be rebuked because they have nothing that the thief can steal from. Better to leave with your life and less of your riches than you had before than to leave with your life and stubbornly cling to what riches you have, should such an unlikely hypothetical meet any of us. The light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked is put out. So the light of the righteous are inclined to praise and rejoicing. We have a song on our tongue, even in the night of the darkness of the night. But the lamp of wickedness does not shine for others to see. They are the blind, leading others into a ditch because they have no light in themselves. They lack any guidance or compass, supernatural compass, save the demons that they submit to, if not are possessed by. By pride comes only strife, but wisdom is with those who take advice. So the two things that are contrasted are pride and wisdom, and pride is anathema to wisdom because it is a self-destructive attitude. It is a sinful attitude which exalts yourself at the expense of other people around you. It considers your own self-needs and self-interest of supreme worth and doesn't really care. Pride is selfish and tends to isolate the ones who are afflicted by its spirit. And the first one to be afflicted by it, the original sin, Lucifer's rebellion, was prompted by the root attitude of pride. He was the supremely magnificently created angel who was number 2 in heaven. The problem is he got bored with being number 2. Legend has it he offered up the songs to Yahweh, but he wanted to have those songs sung for himself. And that's why he launched his rebellion. And, we're stuck in the world we live in, which is plagued by sin. But there is a way out, and it is in this book. 11th verse. Wealth from vanity diminishes, but he who gathers by hand increases. So Solomon, though himself rife, never has a kind word to say about get-rich-quick schemes, which may have been more tempting to younger people of perhaps of less means. But wealth through vanity. Vanity is just the attitude and ethos of no meaning, no purpose. It's just wealth for the sake of wealth, and eventually that's going to lose its luster, and it's going to fall into the hands of others, be it creditors or other rapaciously rich people, or your own descendants. And Solomon struggles over the worthiness of his descendant and all the riches he's leaving him to in the book of Ecclesiastes. And this book is, of course, addressed to his son, the royal ruler in his middle years, who had hoped to raise and groom. But we can gather by the writing of Ecclesiastes, he saw what type of man Rehoboam was maturing into and had doubts and reservations. And it's ultimately because of Rehoboam's own rashness. We read that word, rashness of speech, I believe, in the 12th chapter. So he does not give the correct response to a request, and this ultimately divides the kingdom asunder, and permanently so. And Rehoboam raises an army to retake the northern kingdom of Israel, but he is interrupted by one of the spoken prophets, distinguished from the wicked ones, who tells him that this is the will and destiny, will of the Father and the destiny of the covenant nation to remain a divided one. They are still two covenant peoples. They will now be two covenant nations until they are not. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by Assyria in the year 722 BM, and the southern kingdom of Judah was captured and conquered by the Babylonians in 586 BM. Last and final verse we'll be covering today. Hope drawn out makes the heart sick. Expectancy drawn out makes the heart sick, but a longing comes true is the tree. A longing come true is a tree of life. So anxiety from the heart, that's the more familiar translation. This anxiety is this worrying about the future. What's going to happen to me? What am I doing with my life? Where am I going to be 5 years from now? The saints have a hope in a firm foundation of faith to not be worried about the future. But anxiety is one of the consequences of the fallen natures, and it has a depressing effect on the heart in which it influences. It makes it sick. But longing come true is the realization of the promises, and that is likened to a tree of life. It is a wellspring of life, not unto itself, but also unto others. And the one thing I want to communicate is that the obligation of being blessed is to share that blessing. We cannot have and hoard the blessing to ourselves lest we lose it. We have to go out and bring it to others. So I hope that's the reason you're here. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.